In 2012, the biology wing of Riverside High smelled like old floor wax and formaldehyde. Barney sat in the third row. He had a natural, quiet charisma, not the kind that took over a room, but the kind that made people gravitate toward him. Billy sat directly behind him. She was sharp, observant, and had a low tolerance for anything fake. The nickname happened during a lecture on nocturnal birds. Barney was leaning back in his chair, his hair a mess because he'd stayed up until 3 a.m. memorizing lines for a play. She tapped his shoulder with her pen. "You know," she whispered, "with the messy hair and the fact that you clearly hate the sun. You're basically a barn owl, nocturnal and disheveled." He didn't mind. He actually laughed. Barn owl, it fits," she said, doodling a small owl in her notebook. From that day on, that was who he was to her. Their friendship grew in the quiet gaps of the school day. They became a fixture on the 4:15 p.m. bus ride home. It was a ritual. She'd pull out her earbuds, and he'd take the right one. They spent those rides listening to indie playlist songs with too much reverb and lyrics about leaving small towns. They talked about the future with the kind of honesty you only have at 17. "I'm gonna do it," he told her one rainy afternoon. "I want to move to the city and act. I want to be someone else for a living." Billy took him seriously. "Then I'll be the one keeping things steady while you're off doing that," she replied. "I don't want to be on a screen. I want to be the person behind the scenes, the one who actually changes how the world works through policy and law. I want to be the power player no one ever sees." "A power player and a barn owl," he mused. "We're going to be a problem for people." The end wasn't a choice. It was just how things happened. In the spring of 2014, Barney was scouted for an elite idol camp. It was a strict, high-pressure contract designed to turn teenagers into stars. He was gone within 2 days. The camp's policy was absolute: no outside contact. His phone was confiscated and put in a locker for training discipline. He thought he'd eventually get it back or find a way to call. He didn't realize how total the isolation would be. At the same time, her life hit a crisis. A sophisticated scammer targeted her elderly grandmother, draining her savings and compromising their family's digital security. Her father insisted on a total digital scrub to protect them from further identity theft. Every account was deleted. Every password was changed. Her phone number, the only link Barney had to her, was disconnected. She sent one final email to his old address, but it had already been deactivated by his new agency. By the time Barney emerged from training as a rising star, the girl who called him Barn Owl had vanished. He was on billboards and she was in a fast-track government program. Two people who had promised to change the world, but no longer knew how to find each other in it. By 2017, Barney had successfully transitioned from a grueling idol training period into the film industry. He skyrocketed to nation's heartthrob status almost overnight. Critics and fans alike became obsessed with his expensive gaze, a look that made him seem like he was constantly mourning a ghost. Despite the fame, Barney became a fortress of privacy. He attended the mandatory red carpets and gave polished interviews, but he never let the industry into his personal life. He spent his wealth on a secluded home and high-end audio equipment, living a life of quiet isolation. To the world, he had everything. To himself, he was still the boy on the 4:15 p.m. bus, holding a dead phone and a collection of indie songs that no one else understood. While Barney's face was on every billboard, she was becoming a shadow in the Capitol. She was accepted into the Strategic Leadership Initiative, SLI, a prestigious fast-track program for the government's top tier. By 2019, she had secured a high-stakes role within national security and cyber intelligence. Her days were spent in windowless rooms, managing digital threats and overseeing high-level information protocols. She became an expert at making things and people invisible. However, the cost was total. The relentless pressure of state-level security and the 24/7 nature of the job led to a crushing burnout. By late 2022, she was a shell of herself. A powerful woman who could protect a nation but couldn't remember the last time she'd slept through the night. In the early months of 2023, Barney reached a breaking point with the artifice of his celebrity life. He needed a way to speak without being watched. Using a private, encrypted server, he launched a low-profile online radio station. He named it the Night Owl. It was a quiet, deliberate evolution of the barn owl nickname he had carried like a secret for nearly a decade. He didn't promote it on his official channels or tell his agency. He simply went live at 2 a.m., broadcasting into the digital void. He used the platform to vent his loneliness, playing the exact indie playlists they had shared in 2013 and reading poetry from the books she used to carry in her backpack. He spoke with a warm, hearth-like tone, addressing the lonely people of the world, but in his heart, he was only ever broadcasting to a single listener he feared he would never find again. Meanwhile, at the same time in 2023, Billy's burnout was no longer manageable. She took an indefinite sabbatical, retreating to their remote hometown to hide from the high-stakes world of the capital. But the silence of the town only made her insomnia worse. Her mind, conditioned by years of cyber-intelligence work, wouldn't stop racing. One night, while scrolling through obscure online frequencies in search of white noise, she found a low-bandwidth stream titled The Night Owl. The music was the first thing that hit her. A specific, reverb-heavy indie track they had shared on the bus in 2013. Then, the DJ spoke. The voice was deeper and gravelly with age, but the cadence was hauntingly familiar. It had the exact same rhythmic pauses as the boy who used to sit in front of her in biology. She felt a jolt of recognition, but immediately dismissed it. "It's just the insomnia," she told herself. Barney was a global superstar. His face was on the side of skyscrapers in Tokyo and New York. There was no logical reason a man with his schedule and wealth would be hosting an obscure, zero-budget midnight radio show for 50 listeners. She decided it was a comforting coincidence, a voice that sounded like a ghost she used to know. She began tuning in every night, using the DJ's voice as an anchor to keep her grounded. To show her appreciation, she found the station's small Facebook page. She created an account under the pseudonym Labyrinth and began leaving comments. She treated it like a diary, sharing the thoughts she couldn't tell anyone in her professional life. "Your voice reminds me of someone I knew before the world got so loud," she wrote one night. "He was a bit of a barn owl himself. Hearing you feels like going home." On the other side of the screen, Barney was mid-broadcast when the notification popped up. He was reading an excerpt from a book on urban planning, something he knew she used to find fascinating, when he saw the barn owl comment from Labyrinth. He froze. The silence on the air stretched for several seconds as he stared at the screen. His heart hammered against his ribs. Only one person in the world used that name for him. He realized she had no idea it was actually him. She was talking to the night owl, not the movie star. He decided not to break the illusion. He began replying to her messages with a level of thoughtfulness that went beyond a DJ-listener relationship. He played the songs she mentioned in her comments and read the poems she said she liked. Without a single photo being exchanged or his true identity being revealed, they fell in love with each other's adult souls. To her, he was the mysterious, comforting voice in the dark. To him, she was the girl who had finally found her way back to his frequency. The transition from public Facebook comments to private direct messages happened naturally, driven by a mutual need for a space that felt safe. It started when she sent a message asking for the name of a particularly obscure track he played. He replied within minutes, not with just the name, but with a link and a note. "This always reminded me of someone who liked to watch the rain. I thought you might appreciate it." Their conversations became a nightly ritual. Because she still didn't know he was the Barney, she spoke with a raw honesty she hadn't used in years. She told him about the high-level stress of the capital, the crushing weight of keeping the world steady, and the quiet peace she was finding in her childhood home. Barney, in turn, spoke about the isolation of the city and the strange feeling of being surrounded by people who only loved a version of him that didn't exist. After months of talking, the intimacy reached a tipping point. One night, while she was sitting on her porch, looking out at the foggy valley, she messaged him, "I like being back in the town where everything started. It hasn't changed at all, but I have. Even the old lookout point I always went to by the ridge, and it's the only place I feel like I can breathe." The silence on the other end lasted longer than usual. Then, a simple reply, "I would love to see it. I'm in your town tomorrow. How about we meet?" He drove through the night, leaving the paparazzi and the handlers behind. When he climbed the path to the lookout point, he saw her silhouette against the dawn, the power player who looked just as sharp and focused as she had in biology class. When he finally spoke, he didn't use his movie star voice. He used the low, warm cadence of the night owl. "I told you I'd be here, Labyrinth." The effect was instantaneous. She spun around, her eyes widening in total shock. For several seconds, she couldn't speak, her gaze darting between his face, the face she saw on movie posters, and the man standing in front of her in a simple hoodie. Then, the realization hit her like a physical weight. The shock was immediately replaced by a wave of intense embarrassment. Her face flushed a deep crimson as she mentally replayed every single message she'd sent him over the last few months. She had told this man, the nation's heartthrob, about her childhood insecurities, her late-night burnout rants, and even the barn owl jokes she thought were just a private memory. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. "I've told you everything. I've been trauma dumping on a megastar for 6 months." Barney laughed, a genuine, private sound that wasn't for a camera. "You weren't talking to a megastar. You were talking to me." He stepped closer, and the embarrassment began to melt into a shy, giddy energy. It was the feeling of being 17 again, standing in the back of the bus with a shared earbud. She looked up at him, a small, nervous smile breaking through her professional exterior. That old spark, the one that had been buried under years of government policy and high-stakes intelligence, flared back to life. Before the silence could get awkward, she let out a shaky breath and closed the distance, burying her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly against the morning chill. The frequency was finally clear. They were no longer voices in the dark. They didn't go back to their separate worlds immediately. They spent the next 2 days in a bubble tucked away in her family's old house. It was 48 hours of catching up on a decade of lost time meeting simple meals, walking through the woods, and finally deciding that no matter how complicated their careers were, they weren't letting go a second time. On the final night, parked in her car under a canopy of trees, the weight of their reunion finally bubbled over. Away from the world, they began making out with the frantic, clumsy intensity of the teenagers they used to be. It was messy, desperate, and filled with a decade's worth of "I missed you." When Barney finally drove back to the city to fulfill his filming obligations, she didn't feel the usual dread of her high-stakes career. Within days, she found herself feeling strong enough to end her sabbatical and return to the capital. The burnout hadn't vanished, but its power over her had. She knew that now, when the weight of national security got too heavy, he was only a short drive or a private frequency away. She eventually returned to her high-stakes role in the capital, but she wasn't the same burnt-out official. They began dating in the shadows of the city. Because of her position in communications security, she knew exactly how to navigate the capital without being tracked. They met in nondescript, government-owned apartments or secluded parks at 3 a.m. Eventually, the distance became unbearable. They decided to move into a high-security residence together so they could spend every free moment in each other's company. He would read his scripts in the living room while she handled national security briefings in the home office. As they spent more time together, the industry began to notice. Barney was no longer the lonely mystery. He was focused, happy, and untouchable. When a particularly aggressive tabloid tried to dig into his private life, they didn't just hit a PR wall, they hit a national security wall. Her department's protocols effectively blacklisted their personal data. Digital footprints were scrubbed and unauthorized drones near their home were intercepted. The industry gossip mill quickly learned the unspoken rule. Barney is off the market, and his partner is a ghost in the state. To touch her was to invite a legal and digital audit from the government. It became the ultimate known secret. The superstar was protected by the most powerful woman in the room, and no one dared to speak her name. After a year of living in their shared sanctuary, they married in a private legal ceremony with no guests and no media. It wasn't about the spectacle. It was about the legal finality of two people who had spent a decade trying to find the same frequency again. They were no longer two separate paths. They were a single, fortified front. 2 years into their quiet marriage, they discovered she was pregnant. On a warm night in May, Barney decided to go live for the last time. The stream started like any other night, the familiar crackle of a lo-fi beat and the sound of a match striking as he lights a candle. But the vibe was different. It was heavier, more sentimental. He spoke, gentle as ever. "Good evening, everyone. This is the Night Owl. For 12 years, this frequency has been my sanctuary, and hopefully, yours too. Started this because I was looking for a voice I thought I'd lost forever. As many of you have guessed over the years, I found her." He paused, and for the first time in the history of the station, there was a soft laugh in the background. A woman's voice, distant but warm. "My name is Barney. I know most of you know me from the screen, but I wanted you to know the man behind the mic one last time. We've been married for 2 years now. And while I love these midnights with you, my life is about to get a lot louder. We're expecting a baby, and I've realized I need to trade these sleepless nights for one spent by a crib. Thank you for listening when I was just a boy missing a girl. I hope in some small way these stories gave you hope during your own lonely midnights. You aren't as alone as the silence makes you feel." Signing off, for now. The internet was abuzz the next morning, but the reaction is purely supportive. The barn owl has finally come home. He adjusted the headphones one last time, looking past the microphone to where she stood in the doorway, the power player finally at rest hand as he cut. The signal to a decade of lonely midnights. He knew that for the first time in his life, the silence wasn't an empty space, but a home. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in. Smash that like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more awesome content coming your way.